A cold breath of awareness settles. The world shudders softly beneath the weight of silence. We begin on the edge of perception, the realization that longing itself is sorrow's mask. The mind, in its infinite weaving of desire and dread, becomes a labyrinth whose walls close in with each aspiration denied or attained. We breathe only to chase illusions, to flee the darkness that whispers of mortality and meaninglessness. In the hush of that realization, suffering reveals its shape, not an enemy, but an ancient companion we refuse to acknowledge. Every ache, every pang of loss, each tremor of disappointment is carved by the same dark wound that shapes our illusions of identity. We clutch to frivolous constructs, success, possessions, fleeting pleasures as though they could shield us from the void. Yet void remains patient and untouched, waiting for the mind to surrender its futile rebellions. A poignant release unfolds, to see that modernity prates of comfort while it consumes the soul. The promises of ease, technology's illusions, social triumphs, material accumulation are but paper walls. They crumble before the gale of existential realization. In their collapse, we touch something quieter, the steady hum of nothingness that underlies all noise. There is a strange relief in that hum, as if the world finally ceases its clamor, and we stand alone in a temple of resonant emptiness. Illusion seduces with radiant sheen, the notion that pleasure equals peace, that identity equals permanence, that becoming equals fulfillment. Yet every pleasure fades into absence. Every identity fractures in time. Every becoming bursts entropic decay. Suffering persists, unasked. We resist it, and in doing so, magnify its presence. To deny suffering is to erect battlements in a flood. The walls collapse. The mind drowns in its delusions. Here is the second release. To witness the futility of the will, the endless striving, ambition's false promise, the restless pursuit of that which cannot satisfy. Will is not our ally, but a tyrant. It demands progress, success, love, status, only to render them hollow. We chase ephemeral images, hoping their hold will bestow permanence. They slip, we suffer again. Yet suffering is not failure. It is the mirror that shows us the emptiness we have woven. The mind recoils, seeking distraction, consumption, noise, fleeting entertainment. Yet each distraction reinforces the veil, keeps us trapped in a cycle of forgetfulness. Only stillness offers reprieve. Stillness that is not achieved, but revealed. When the mind ceases its chatter, when desire pauses, when identity loosens. In that quiet, the suffering remains, but with transparency, not obscurity. A third release pulses through the narration. To understand that renunciation is not defeat but liberation, not denial of life, but refusal of illusion. When we cease to chase happiness as an object, we encounter being itself. When we relinquish the compulsion to avoid pain, we embrace reality in its fullness. The dialectic dissolves. Pleasure and pain, doing and undoing, presence and absence merge into a single current of awareness. In that awareness, compassion dawns, not the sentimental kind, but a deep, unflinching understanding of the suffering of all wills. We see that every being is bound to desire, bound to frustration, bound to despair. And the strange comfort arrives, recognition that we need not be unique in our torment. Our sorrow links us in the order of life. Compassion is the quiet testimony of awareness, not to soothe illusions, but to witness suffering with clarity. We drift deeper. Civilization with its lights, its idols, its grand narratives seems increasingly frail, increasingly absurd. Empires disintegrate, ideologies collapse, technology advances, yet cannot still the heart. The modern promises crumble under scrutiny. Identity, politics, consumerism, self-improvement, they all serve the will, not awareness. The great masquerade of progress offers no shelter from the suffering core. We look into the mirror. The face staring back is hollow with longing, restless with dissent, aching with unquenchable thirst. And there comes release 4, the revelation that true renunciation is internal. It does not demand retreat from the world, but retreat from the illusion of improvement, from the fixation on becoming better, stronger, happier. The world continues, but we loosen our grip. We observe its passing, untouched by the motion. The sorrow-laden mind becomes a compass, not driven, but pointed. We carry suffering like a lantern, illuminating the darkness instead of fleeing it. Each moment carries the weight of impermanence, the breath, the sensation, the thought, all destined to fade. Yet awareness of impermanence births depth. When we know that everything ends, every moment becomes sacred. This is not mourning nor triumph. It is lucid presence in the face of dissolution. We lean into the hush between thoughts, the quiet between heartbeats, the silence between breaths. Fifth release drifts in, the strange solace in radical honesty, not accepting platitudes, but facing suffering head-on. The emptiness beneath the mind, the longing beneath the will, the isolation beneath the social veneer, they stand exposed. No filter, no gloss, just truth. And truth is quiet, austere, crystalline. It does not stir for applause. It does not flinch. It clarifies. We wander in the temple of our own latent disquiet. In that chamber of stillness, we sense the possibility not of euphoria, but of refined serenity. Serenity not won by denying the world, but by embracing suffering as the path to clarity. The self unravels its myths. The masks drop. The will surrenders its illusions. Pain remains, but without resistance. Longing remains, but without desperation. The narrative pace slows. The listener's breath aligns with the cadence of resignation. The monologue ceases to speak outwardly and begins to breathe inwardly. Words fade into silence. The world recedes. What remains is awareness shimmering in emptiness. At the close, there is neither summary nor resolution. Only the soul's quiet expanse. The space between suffering and illusion illuminated. The winding path of renunciation dissolves into itself. The voice withdraws, leaving behind the echo of clarity. The stillness that remains after the lantern flickers out. Suffering does not arrive as punishment, nor as some cosmic test of character. It arrives because we exist, and existence is woven through with lack. We are not born into the fullness of being, but into the hunger of becoming, always reaching, never grasping, always yearning, never resting. From the first cry to the last breath, we move in circles around a center that remains empty. What we call happiness is not a state, but a reprieve, a brief silencing of the will, a moment where desire is momentarily absent or seemingly fulfilled. Yet even in its fulfillment, the will renews itself, another want, another fear, another illusion of control. This is not cruelty, it is the nature of willing itself. The tiger does not maul out of malice, and the fire does not burn with intention. They act according to their being. So does the will indifferent, restless, insatiable. To love is to suffer, not because love is flawed, but because it magnifies desire. We do not merely want companionship, we want permanence, security, reciprocation, transcendence. We want the other to still our chaos, to reflect us as whole, to silence the ceaseless whisper that we are alone. Yet the other, too, is bound to their will, their fear, their impermanence. And so, in the grasping, love decays into anxiety. We do not hold its slips, and yet we continue. Each morning we rise, not out of conviction, but out of compulsion. The body wakes because it must. The mind follows because it cannot do otherwise. We clothe ourselves in tasks, distractions, small dramas, and minor victories, all to stave off the recognition that underneath lies a silence more real than anything we claim to be. That silence is not peace, it is clarity without comfort. A cold mirror. Even our noble pursuits, art, philosophy, religion, are born not from serenity, but from pain refined. The painter spills color to express a longing he cannot name. The philosopher dissects thought to make sense of the endless riddle. The mystic prays, not because he knows, but because he aches. Beauty, truth, devotion, all flowers fed by suffering soil. It is through pain that depth emerges, not despite it. Yet the world around us begs for denial. It speaks in slogans, in shining images, in curated masks of happiness. It urges us to become, to thrive, to manifest dreams, ignoring that dreams are crafted by desire, and desire is the root of our unrest. This is the age of distraction. Glowing screens, endless content, simulated intimacy. But beneath every dopamine spike is the same question, unasked and unanswered. Who am I when all this noise ceases? Detachment is not the erasure of emotion, nor a retreat into numbness. It is the unbinding of identity from experience. To feel pain without becoming pain. To watch thought without becoming thinker. To let go of the compulsion to possess, to define, to control. It is the slow dissolution of the mirage. We call self a mirage, stitched together from memory, desire, fear, and narrative. Once seen, it cannot be unseen. Once unraveled, it cannot be rewoven. There is no final awakening, no moment where the veil lifts and all becomes bliss. That, too, is illusion, the final and most seductive. What unfolds, instead, is a long dying of illusions, each one surrendered like a leaf falling into autumn stillness. With each surrender, suffering remains, but it no longer binds. It becomes transparent, a mist through which the world is seen more clearly, if more sorrowfully. To exist is to carry the burden of consciousness. The rock does not long, the tree does not regret, but we fragile, reflective, fractured bear within us the torment of awareness. We know we suffer, and we know we cannot escape. This knowing is both curse and gate. Through it, the path of renunciation opens not with triumph, but with quiet release. The rope is not cut, it is let go. To look into the face of existence is to encounter a mirror that never smiles. The world, in its entirety, does not exist for us. Nor does it possess a script in which we play a meaningful part. It is indifferent, as wind is to the leaf, it shatters against the stone. Yet this indifference is not the cruelty of a god, but the neutrality of being itself. Things happen because they must, not because they ought. There is no ought, only is. And in that is, we suffer. All meaning we attribute is our own invention, projected onto a canvas that does not respond. We chase meaning like thirsty men chase a mirage across a desert of silence. We bind it to relationships, careers, legacy. But these are just names we give to structures built on sand. Time washes over them, the beloved forgets or dies. The work is replaced or ridiculed. The legacy, if remembered, becomes distorted, a ghost misquoted by the living. There is no personal significance in the turning of the stars or the bloom of the flower. Nature neither knows us nor regards us. It acts, it decays, it renews. We romanticize it because we are afraid of its blankness. But the tree does not care that we suffer. The ocean does not mourn our passing. This solitude is not tragic, it is truth. We are alone, not because we are unloved, but because we are self-aware in a world that is not. And yet the self is the grandest illusion of all. What we call I is merely the trembling surface of a deeper unrest, the will to live, the compulsion to continue, to strive, to assert. It is not substance, but movement, not identity, but friction. Strip away memory and desire, and what remains? A watching, a bare awareness. Even this we cannot hold. For the one who wishes to hold it is itself illusion. Suffering arises precisely because we believe this illusion. We think we must protect it, aggrandize it, validate it. Thus, we are bound to fear, pride, envy, craving. Every injury to ego stings like a wound to the flesh, because we mistake it for being. But there is nothing to protect. The self is a ripple, not a rock. To defend it is to wage war against water. When suffering is understood, not as anomaly, but as essence, the mind begins to loosen. We stop asking, why me? And begin to see, it is all of us. This is not despair, it is the fading of delusion. The loneliness that once pierced now spreads into a vast field of quiet companionship. We are alone together, joined in sorrow, bonded in futility. The very shared nature of our affliction becomes a kind of unspoken grace. Even joy, what little we find, is shadowed by the awareness of its end. A laugh in the warmth of a friend's presence already carries the seed of future absence. A beautiful moment already contains its vanishing. Every high is haunted. And yet we are told to pursue joy as though it were stable, as though it could be banked against suffering. It cannot. Every joy costs. Every gain leaks time. Religion offers narratives, symbols, doctrines, maps for the anxious soul. But if they are to serve truth, they must first empty us. The mystic who ascends does so not in ecstasy, but in surrender. He does not reach heaven, he lets go of earth. In renunciation, he finds no throne, only a space where the will has ceased its crying. That space is not filled with light or song. It is filled with nothing, a silent cessation. The wise do not speak of salvation, they speak of silence. They do not offer dreams, they offer death, the death of illusion, of self, of need. In this, the world may still turn. We may still act, speak, love, but the center is hollow, the fire has cooled. The will no longer lashes. This is not numbness, it is freedom not from life, but from illusion. And so we drift further into this ocean of sobriety. We let the waves of suffering pass through us, knowing they do not seek us, they simply are. We stop resisting pain, we stop clutching pleasure. We do not try to hold the moment, we let it die. In doing so, we are no longer at war with the nature of things. We become like the evening wind present, quiet, without need. Detachment is not the killing of feeling, it is the feeling without ownership. Sorrow still arises, but it does not define. Anger still burns, but it does not consume. Fear still trembles, but it does not control. All things arise, and all things pass. We watch them come, we let them go. In the watcher, we find not peace, but the absence of chaos. And perhaps that is enough. Not joy, not purpose, not healing, but a steady awareness, a solemn gaze, a heart unburdened by the need to become. The self dies a slow death, not with violence, but with clarity. Not with agony, but with seeing. And in its place, only the silence of truth. There comes a point in the soul's descent where even the wish to escape suffering reveals itself as another veil of the will. We do not seek freedom, we seek relief. We do not renounce, we bargain. And this bargaining cloaked in spiritual language, adorned with rituals and ascetic pride, is but the will in disguise, demanding paradise in exchange for discipline, asking for immortality in return for sacrifice. But truth makes no transactions. It stands still, untouched, unmoved. The desire to be free from pain is still desire. The longing to dissolve is still longing. Only when even the yearning for escape is exhausted does stillness truly begin. It is not chosen, it arrives like a grey dawn after the collapse of all hope. There is no pride in this moment, no exaltation, only a weariness so complete it becomes clarity, only a silence so vast it no longer contains fear. In that silence, the world no longer seduces. Beauty remains, but it no longer intoxicates. Love persists, but it no longer enslaves. The senses still function, the heart still beats, but the fever of clinging has broken. We eat, we sleep, we speak, but the compulsion to matter fades. The theater continues, but we no longer act from need. We play the part, not because we believe the story, but because the script is passing through us. This is the sobriety of renunciation, not rejection, not cynicism, not nihilism. Those are still reactions, still flames fed by the will. Renunciation is the quiet turning away, not in anger, but in recognition. The world is as it is burning, changing, dying. We need not condemn it. We only need to see it without the lenses of hope, without the ache to transform its nature into something it is not. The heart mourns in this place. It mourns not for lost things, but for the years spent chasing shadows. It weeps not for others, but for the self it once believed in. The grief of awakening is not loud. It is the kind of grief that sits beside you in silence, knowing nothing can be said. And yet, through this morning, the first taste of genuine peace begins to stir. Not happiness, but release. Not arrival, but the absence of pursuit. Even time changes its rhythm here. The urgency of days, the chase for meaning, the desperation of youth, they dissolve. Time is no longer a race towards some imagined fulfillment, but a current that carries everything toward dissolution. And strangely, in this dissolution, life begins to feel sacred, not because it is triumphant, but because it is fragile. Not because it promises eternity, but because it whispers of transience. One watches the seasons shift, the faces age, the laughter turn to memory. One walks through ruins, not with despair, but with reverence. Every crumbling wall, every fading photograph, every forgotten name becomes a monument to impermanence. The world is a cemetery of illusions, and yet, in this cemetery, one finds the only ground firm enough to stand on, the ground of seeing. It is here, in this seeing, that compassion deepens, not the loud, performative compassion of ideology, but the quiet sorrow of recognition. We see others not as adversaries, not as mysteries, not even as companions, but as fellow sufferers, each carrying a burden they do not understand, each acting out the tragedy of the will in their own way. The angry, the lost, the cruel, the arrogant all are trapped, as we once were, in the prison of self. This awareness does not make us superior, it makes us tender. We no longer need to judge, because we see that every judgment arises from the same delusion we now let go. We no longer need to fix others, because we see that their suffering too is their path. We become like shadows on the wall present, but without interference. Our love becomes a silence that holds, not a voice that demands. And in this final turning, we see even death differently, not as an end, not as an enemy, but as the most honest thing we ever meet. It does not lie, it does not bargain, it does not wait for permission. It comes, as it always has, to erase the illusion of control. And when it comes, if we have lived without clinging, it does not frighten, it liberates. It carries away the last remnants of the dream. This, then, is renunciation. Not a doctrine, but a dissolution. Not a struggle, but a fading. Not a conquest, but an absence. The self goes quiet, the will grows thin. The world continues, but the soul no longer kneels before it. There is no longer anything to chase. Only the stillness of what is. And in that stillness, nothing is missing, nothing is needed, nothing is held. There is no final word, no final truth to clutch. Every truth we name becomes another cage, another mask for the infinite. Language itself is born of the will's desperation to fix what cannot be fixed, to shape the formless into something knowable. But all form decays, all knowing dissolves. The wise do not speak to define, they speak to unburden, to carve silence from noise, to guide the listener not toward answers, but toward the stillness where the question dies. Suffering remains. It does not vanish with clarity. It softens, not in intensity, but in ownership. One no longer says, "my pain," for the self that once claimed it no longer clings. Pain arises, pain passes. In between, there is only witnessing. Not detachment in the cold sense of avoidance, but in the warm, mournful sense of no longer being deceived. The heart still aches, but it does not protest. The protest was always the source of agony. Desire becomes a memory of fire, no longer burning, only glowing in the distance. What once felt like purpose now feels like unrest. The desire to be loved, to be seen, to be known, these dissolve not because they are unworthy, but because they were never truly ours. They were movements of the will, seeking echo, seeking affirmation in the faces of others. Now there is no one to echo. The face reflects itself, unadorned, and asks for nothing in return. What remains is bare life, eating, breathing, walking beneath trees, watching the slow death of days. These simple movements become sacred, not because they hold meaning, but because they hold nothing. They are free from the burden of becoming, to drink water when thirsty, to lie down when tired, to listen without interpretation, to feel without naming. This is all that's left when the self recedes. The mind still speaks, but its voice no longer commands. Thoughts arise like birds over a gray sea brief, distant, fading into horizon. They no longer demand action, no longer narrate identity. The stream flows, but the observer is no longer pulled beneath. There is no struggle to stop the thinking, only the absence of belief in what is thought. The tyrant becomes a whisper. The whisper becomes a breeze. The breeze passes. And so, we enter the realm of unknowing. Not the ignorance of the uninformed, but the lucidity of one who has seen through all knowledge. Every system fails, every structure collapses, every path folds into the same groundless void. There is no progress, no ladder, no summit. Enlightenment is not a light. It is the dark clarity that remains when all lights are extinguished. The eye adjusts. The soul no longer needs to see. One walks through life as through a forest of phantoms. Voices echo, shadows move. The past revisits like a half-remembered dream, but none of it binds. The ghosts are not enemies. They are remnants of a former self, still wandering, still seeking, unaware that they no longer live. We do not banish them, we bow to them and keep walking. Even memory begins to loosen. The timeline blurs, the story fractures. What happened and what might have happened become indistinct. The past loses its grip. We do not forget, we simply no longer belong to the one who remembers. And without that anchor, we drift. But this drifting is not confusion, it is release. We no longer have to make sense of it all. We are no longer required to carry the weight of narrative. And as detachment deepens, so too does tenderness. Not the kind that seeks to help, to save, to mend, but the kind that simply remains. A presence that does not interfere, a silence that does not abandon. When another weeps, we weep too, not because we can fix their pain, but because we see it. We have sat in the same cold room. We recognize the shape of that despair. And in that recognition, something ancient stirs. A bond not of identity, but of sorrow shared. All beings suffer, not because they are flawed, but because they exist. To will is to lack. To lack is to suffer. Even the happiest face hides unrest. The final silence does not announce itself. It arrives as a hush at the edge of thought, a thinning of the veil between what was long believed and what simply is. No trumpet sounds, no curtain falls. The drama ends not with applause, but with forgetting. The self that once clung, wept, fought, and longed, slips quietly into the background, like a candle extinguishing without witness. There is no culmination, no enlightenment to crown the journey, only the fading, the soft erosion of identity, not as loss, but as relief, like a fever breaking, like a name whispered one last time and then never again. All that is left is stillness, a stillness not empty, but free, not barren, but untouched. It does not promise, it does not soothe, it simply does not demand. And in that stillness, one feels the pulse of life, now unclaimed. Trees move without witness, rivers run without name. The sky spreads, boundless, indifferent. The body walks, breathes, sleeps, without narrative. The eyes see, but they do not interpret. The ears hear, but they do not grasp. The world unfolds, and there is no longer a center to receive it. There is a gentleness to this absence, a kindness born not of intention, but of release. One no longer holds tightly the threads of time. The future ceases to be an expectation. The past ceases to be a wound. What is, the rest dissolves. There is no journey left to map, no destination to reach. Just a slow unfolding of being unattached, unresisted, unadorned. Even suffering, that oldest companion, becomes transparent. It still rises, like a fog at dawn, but it does not bind, it does not define. It passes through, like wind through reeds. The will no longer reacts, the heart no longer identifies. There is sorrow, but no owner. There is longing, but no seeker. There is grief, but no story to preserve it. And so the soul, if we may still call it that, becomes a quiet place, a field in winter, bare trees, pale sky, no audience, no purpose, only presence. A presence so subtle it almost isn't there. A trace of being without claim, like footprints in snow disappearing as they're made. This is the final renunciation, not a gesture, but a vanishing. The last desire is not given up, it ceases. The last illusion is not shattered, it simply fades. There is no awakening, no realization, no attainment. Only the soft disappearance of need, and with it, the disappearance of self. What remains is not one who is free, but freedom itself. Not one who sees, but sight without center. Not one who endures, but endurance without narrative. Life continues, the sun rises, the body ages, the world spins, but the grip has loosened, the fever has passed, the dream has ended. And from the ashes of that dream, there rises nothing. Not emptiness as lack, but emptiness as peace. Not absence as despair, but absence as truth. A truth so still, so unyielding, that even the will dares not disturb it. Here, at the quiet end, there is no more to be said. Only the breath, and then the space after the breath. Only the silence, and then the deeper silence, only the disappearance. And in that disappearance, what was never ours is finally let go. And what we truly are is finally left unspoken. T. Even the most powerful being fears loss. Every desire is a confession. I am not complete. And every act to fulfill desire is a futile dance around the void. This is not tragedy. It is simply the nature of things. To deny it is to remain blind. To see it is to begin to let go. And so, the letting go continues. Not in great acts of renunciation, but in the quiet moments where we no longer reach, we no longer correct, we no longer pretend. We accept the flaw in every breath, the crack in every form, the sorrow in every joy. We see the brokenness and we do not flinch. It is not the world that heals, it is the gaze that no longer demands healing. In this gaze, life becomes a shadow play, light and dark, moving across a surface we no longer mistake for substance. We smile, not because we are content, but because we no longer need to be. The burden of hope has been laid down. The pain of future and past is released. And what remains is simply this breath, this moment, this fleeting form moving through the ashes of time.